Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. The Outdoor Minimalist podcast has the goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. Why would anyone want to learn the wild skills of our ancient ancestors today when our lives are full of advanced technologies, quick conveniences, and the joys of instant communication? What could their Paleolithic wisdom have to offer us when a blockchain digital utopia is on our horizon? That is the opening paragraph of the book, Why We Need to Be Wild, one woman's quest for ancient human answers to 21st century problems. And they're the very same questions that author Jessica Carew Kraft sets out to answer during a 5-year research project. While we can't cover her entire book in one podcast episode, in episode 108 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, I had the pleasure of sitting down to chat with Jessica about her book process, what inspired her research, and how we can all aspire to rewild in our own lives. Jessica is an independent journalist trained in anthropology. She holds degrees from the University of London, Yale University, and Swarthmore College. Her reporting on health, culture, tech, and education have been published in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Forbes, San Francisco Chronicle, Politico, NBC News, KQED, and many other outlets. In midlife, she became a naturalist and wild food forager. Formerly residing in Berkeley, she now lives with her partner, 2 daughters, and like-minded neighbors of all species in the forest of the Sierra Foothills. Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better-performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax, hemp, and tencel, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 15% off your next order. All right, so thank you for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, Jessica. I look forward to hearing more about your book and some of the insights that you gathered during that writing and research process. But before we get to that, I also would just love to know how you got interested in outdoor recreation, nature, enjoying all of that, and how it fits into your life now.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on this. I just was really attracted to this idea of being outdoors and being minimalist. Like that's my whole vibe. But it wasn't. And I wouldn't say that I grew up with any kind of immersive outdoor experience at all. Although I did frequently go to parks, sort of they're called metro parks where I grew up in central Ohio, and frequently going and just observing nature, enjoying it from a manicured path. There was no interaction. There was no sniffing of plants or looking under logs to see what creatures were dwelling there. It was very much just like nature is beautiful to view from this very safe place. And playing outdoors, but in the suburbs. So everything also there is super manicured. And I didn't take my first camping trip until I was 30 years old when I went to Yosemite with a few friends. So this has not been a long steeping interest. It has been sort of like a flash, this passion, this urgency and need to immerse myself in nature, I would say over the last 7 years. And I'm just super grateful that I did have a series of events in my life that I cover in the book that drew me closer and made me feel like I have got to connect in a deep way to nature, understanding my local ecology, spending time, without any comforts or conveniences of our modern life, in the wilderness. And that those experiences have shaped me for those past years. And now what my relationship is that I've got to get outside and be in as wild a place as I possibly can every single day. And I really try to also eat some wild food, or just engage all of my senses in the outdoors, because I have found that that is the best thing for my health and happiness. And that I get kind of cranky if I don't have my outdoor time. And then supplement that with, as much as I can, getting away completely off the grid, away from screens, away from the kind of structured obligations that we all have, and finding that that also just increases my quality of life.
Absolutely. I am the same way. I can definitely tell there's a mood shift on the days where I don't go outside for as long as I would like. So it's
Yeah.
very important. And writing, like writing a book is a big undertaking. So congratulations on the publishing of your book. And has writing been something that you also found later in life, similar to your love for nature, or is that a career that you have had your whole life?
Yeah, I would say my whole life I've been a writer. Always wanted to do it. I come from a family of academics, professors, people who have published books sort of in midlife, and that was always a goal. Uh, I'm of Jewish heritage, and there's a quote from the Talmud that my dad has posted over his desk that he's always had there that completely influenced the path of my life. And what it says is, have a child, plant a tree, write a book. And this was seen as sort of the completion of a full and whole life in the Jewish tradition. So I definitely was like, okay, I've had two children, I've planted a lot of trees. It's now time for me to write a book. And as a journalist, that's always sort of the end goal for people who are seriously engaging the profession, because articles are one offs. They might take you a couple of days to write, but you can never kind of sink your teeth into a deep topic unless you do take on that challenge of writing a book. And it is a challenge. I'm reminded that the free climber Tommy Caldwell, who was the first person to scale the Dawn Wall in Yosemite, like kind of a famous dude. There's a movie about him. He wrote a book about his experience because it was really heroic. And an interviewer asked him afterward, they said, okay, so what was harder, Tommy, scaling the Dawn Wall or writing a book? He said, writing a book, which I'm not sure I agree with. I'm not ready to go free climb anywhere near Yosemite, but writing a book is hard, even for people who write every day, who are accustomed to deadlines, who know how to put words together. It's just one of those things that it's like having a baby. It's uncomfortable. It's difficult. There's a deadline. You know you're gonna have to move through it. There's no way out except through. And so I'm really pleased. It took me about 5, 6 years to write this book, but it's finally coming out. And it definitely had a sort of harrowing journey in the publishing world where it was killed by the first publisher. And I didn't know if it would see the light of day, which was very good for my ego to know that, like, okay, not everybody loves your work. You're going to have to work harder, be scrappier, and make this better. But we did get the publisher Source Books. I have to credit my agent, Ted Weinstein. He's fantastic. And yeah, it's coming out, or it came out, and it's been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, it was released on August 22nd of 2023, I believe. And yeah, that's so interesting. It's always really fun for me to hear from other writers and their experiences and kind of like their ups and downs through the writing process. So thanks for sharing that. And let's just get into the book then. So, what inspired you to write about this? And it was a journey. You said it took about 5 or so years to complete this. So, why did you feel like the need to tell this story?
Mhm. Well, I had always been a journalist, like that was my career. And I had some forays in academia and picked up a couple of master's degrees and did some adjunct teaching. But I found myself in the epicenter of the Silicon Valley tech world. We're talking about circa 2014 to 2016. And I was increasingly hearing that tech was going to solve all of the problems in the world. So everything from like, oh, you have more earwax buildup, let's build a device and make an app. Oh, we need food delivered to our houses faster. There's an app for that. And also to climate change and bigger social issues. And so I was advising CEOs and startup entrepreneurs and venture capitalists on how to write their content and also authoring some of that content for them. And I found myself increasingly uneasy about contributing to this grand narrative that tech was about to save the world and solve all our problems, make our lives incredibly comfortable and convenient. At the touch of a button, we could have anything we wanted, because I knew from my previous journalism and research and study of anthropology and environmental studies that there were huge ramifications to the mining of various minerals that were used to create the hardware, and then that the software was draining our energy grids, and then that there were so many people who did not have access to tech, or who were sort of, for more, better better term, but sort of enslaved to the system, whether they were Amazon warehouse workers, or they were people on assembly lines, or they were the delivery people for all that food that was going to people's houses in the flash of a couple of seconds. And I felt like, wow, tech really doesn't have a conscience. It doesn't understand these pressing issues, and it wants to kind of whitewash it for the consumer and make us all feel like it's a happy, healthy, wonderful world. And at the same time, I was seeing my colleagues working in tech, and they were not happy. They were so stressed out, overworked, underslept, couldn't spend enough time with their families. And I myself was experiencing this lifestyle of being indoors for 8+ hours a day, constantly tethered to a screen, whether it was my phone or computer, not able to basically observe any of my biological instincts. I couldn't get enough exercise, not enough sleep, not enough time with family or friends, couldn't eat healthfully. And I just said, this is kind of seeming like a big lie, and I can't take it anymore. And I have a conscience, and I don't want to contribute to this world anymore. But instead of sort of taking one of the existing options for opting out of that highly industrialized high-tech lifestyle, I could have like just gone homesteading, or like started a permaculture garden, and all of that stuff is valid and very interesting. But for some reason, I was attracted to an extreme vision of anti-tech. And I started looking into this idea of rewilding, which is trying to align our human habits, our lifestyle, everything that we do, with how our ancient human ancestors lived. And the reason that people want to do that, and I think everybody would probably be familiar with the paleo diet, the idea is that that is how we evolved. And so therefore we are best adapted when we observe a lifestyle that is closest to how those folks lived and still live. There are a lot of existing hunter-gatherer groups who preserve this ancient human lifestyle of living completely in nature, subsisting off of it, and not damaging, destroying, or polluting it. And I, through various research avenues, started exploring folks who grew up in the modern computerized world and rejected it, and decided to live either all the time or part of the time, or just whenever they could find a way to do it with Paleolithic era skills. And it was incredible to me. It was like, what? There are folks who don't have electricity, don't have running water, don't engage screens at all, don't have cell phones. And I found them at what are called primitive skills gatherings, also known as ancestral skills gatherings. And I attended a bunch of these with my children. We had a phenomenal time. And it was concerning to me because I had never heard about these before. Nobody else had heard, who I knew in kind of my urban educated cohort. Nobody was going to this stuff. They hadn't heard of it. And so I wanted to spread the word and to say, like, there are so many different ways to live in the United States these days. And we do not have to take the cultural script of living an urban life, consuming all the things, being completely dependent on industrial goods. So that's what I got involved with. And then I did wilderness immersion programs. I trained myself in pretty much every basic human ancestral skill, everything from friction fire to hide tanning, flint knapping, making my own sandals out of rawhide, weaving baskets, and found so much fulfillment through that that I was like, yeah, I got to talk about this as well. So I wove in my personal story and my own transformation through learning these wild skills with anthropology, archaeology, my on-the-ground research with folks who practice them.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's an amazing journey, and it is interesting, like, how organically you kinda, like, came to those conclusions, and you're like, "I need to figure out this because it directly impacts my life and could change a lot of other people's lives." So that's amazing. And I wanna back up,
Thanks.
like, a little bit to kinda, like, break down some of the concepts in your book, in a little more detail for listeners. And, you talked a lot about, like, the Paleolithic lifestyles and how they're kinda like extreme forms of minimalism and things like that. So if we were to compare that lifestyle directly to our current consumptive lifestyle, What do you think are kind of like the main pillars of difference?
Right. It would be this idea of dependency versus self-sufficiency. So the Paleolithic person or the contemporary hunter-gatherer who lives in nature in a small nomadic group, subsisting off of what they can find in the environment, which oftentimes is incredibly abundant. They have self sufficiency. So each individual in that group is able to provide for their own needs once they reach adulthood. And adulthood for these groups is actually quite younger. Any kind of 12-year-old, if you're looking at like the Kalahari Bushmen, the San Kung people, any 12-year-old in that group will be able to find food, find water, create medicines from things that they can locate in nature. They'll be able to negotiate trade deals. They'll be able to take care of younger children. So at such a young age for our culture, these folks are pretty much self-sufficient. And then they're also, so tightly knit as a group that everybody in the group has an equal role, and they're seen to be what's called egalitarian, which means that there's no hoarding of resources among, certain powerful people. There's really very little hierarchy except for that of seniority. And so in our society today, all we have is hierarchy. All we have is unequal distribution of resources. All we have is dependency on centralized industrial systems. I would say nobody who lives in contemporary America is self-sufficient because we can't even order food or find a date without our cell phone. And nobody knows how to make a cell phone for themselves, right? So we have completely delinked our knowledge and our skills from the stuff that we use. And there's nobody who can survive in the wilderness who's been raised in our contemporary society. So those are very stark differences. And what's alarming to me is that it's only taken a few generations to create this state of total dependency. And some people call it domestication, because just as your cat or dog depends on you for the industrialized food that you feed them every night, that's how we are. We have sort of become our own pets. And we cannot live without this life support system that now reaches across the globe. Our food comes from 1,500 miles away. It does not come from local sources. Most of us don't go out and pick food from our local environment. So to me, that was what was actually extreme, not the people I was studying who were sort of returning to the original human lifestyle, but rather the fact that our mass society has deviated so much from how we evolved and how our ancestors only a few generations ago were living much closer to nature and in a state of more self-sufficiency. And it's alarming because should we encounter breakdowns of these systems, which are beginning to happen, so many mainstream scientists are talking about potential collapse, whether it's due to the overcomplexity of our industrialized lifestyle, the global system vulnerable to attack in various ways, whether it's due to that or it's due to future climate change ramifications. Like, we cannot continue on the path that we're on. And so for me, learning about self-sufficiency, becoming more self-sufficient myself, gives me a sense of hope and competency that whatever happens in the future, I'll be okay. I'll be able to help people, help my family. We will survive. But I don't think most people feel that way. I think they're panicked at the idea of not having the cell phone, at not having the grocery store available.
Yes, yeah, it's like it adds to the eco anxiety, if you will, at times.
Right.
And do you
Yeah.
think that like our dependency on these larger systems, do you think that is like what is harming a lot of people mentally and physically? I mean, there is an uptick in mental health concerns and all of
Mhm.
that is rampant in Western cultures around the world. And so, do you think that has a lot to do with it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a new book out, which I think perfectly explains this, which is called The Evolved Nest by Darsha Narvaez. And in it, she describes how our expectation as Homo sapiens, born um, anytime, when we've been this as a species, our expectation is that we enter a nomadic foraging group that lives off of nature, that is very close knit, that isn't isolated into nuclear families, that isn't dependent on any systems, and where that child can grow and learn from many adults, many children of all ages throughout their life and feel socially supported and feel like they have that kind of mastery over their environment. And instead, we're born with the same bodies, brains, minds, and spirit of hunter gatherers. Like basically, our DNA hasn't changed for over 10,000 years, possibly 50,000 years, going back 300,000 years sometimes. So we are born hunter gatherers, but yet we come into this artificial, civilized, structured, institutionalized world. And what does that do to us? Well, it creates trauma from that separation from what we were expecting, right? I mean, and you can see this in zoo animals, the way that they behave when they're caged and enclosed. They're not fed the food that they would have gathered naturally. They're not able to interact with the environment the way they would. They also get all sorts of traumatic mental illnesses, physical health ailments, psychological problems. So we're like caged animals in a zoo, and we are suffering for it. And the more that we can connect back to our inner nature, of social support, of healthy face-to-face interaction, of being outside and being in nature and gathering what we need from it, the more we can do that, the healthier and happier we become, because that is our heritage, our blueprint that our biological system is sort of expecting to flourish. So absolutely, we are traumatized by these separations, and we're seeing the impact every day as our lives grow increasingly isolated and increasingly artificialized.
Yeah, I do want to talk about then kind of your journey and some of the benefits that you experienced during your own rewilding. Like, what changes did you notice in yourself?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there were, the stress and overwhelm of kind of holding on down that 9 to 5, but often like 8 to 10 working life job while also parenting two young children, living in a city. Like the stress was unbelievable. I was on antidepressants. I was drinking a lot. My vitamin D levels were super low, which is very common for folks these days. Like we are definitely not getting the exposure to sunshine that we need. And so many studies have been done in the past 10 to 20 years showing the essential nature of vitamin D as like almost one of the top nutrients that our body needs for our immune system, for our hormones, for our growth, for it has anti-cancer properties. So I had super low vitamin D levels. I was lucky that I got them checked and that I was able to then remedy that through, quitting the job, spending a lot more time outside in nature. And as I reduced those stress points in my life and replaced the urban frenzy with the natural solitude and the peace of being outside, I absolutely, depression gone, anxiety gone, stress and overwhelm. Still there a little bit because it is hard to be a mom today, but I would say the benefits, like I can't go back. Like there's just no alternative for me now that I'm used to a life that has more freedom, autonomy, and exposure to the outside. Like I would never go back inside after that, because it's just a better quality of life. And in my book, I talk about anthropologists who study the lifestyles of hunter gatherers and basically prove that their quality of life, the amount of leisure time they have, the amount of social support, the extremely low rates of mental illness and physical illness that these groups endure, like it's almost nothing compared to what we think is normal in our society. These anthropologists have shown that their lifestyle, while they don't have the riches, they don't have the technology, they don't have the pillow on the bed at night or the air conditioning when it's hot, but despite all that, they are happier and healthier than we are overall. And so just using that as a benchmark for my own life, trying to get closer and closer to our original human lifestyle there's been nothing like it. It's just been the best thing ever.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear about those anthropological studies. I always, well, don't always, but I have read quite a bit about like autoimmune disorders and like the correlation between that and like our current stressors in the Western culture.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just so interesting, like how connected all of it is. Like, I think a lot of
Hmm.
times we think of it separate, but it is all intertwined and it all is related. So it's just so interesting. Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
okay. So all of those things are great, right? Like everyone wants all of those things. They want less stress. They want to be healthier. Everyone wants good vitamin D levels, all that. But most of us can't live on one long minimalist camping trip, although that's kind of my dream.
Right? You'll get
So
there. Yeah.
maybe one day. So what are some ways to make these benefits more accessible to the average person?
Right. Well, there are so many ways we can align with our sort of hunter-gatherer DNA, and they do not have to involve even going outside necessarily. Although that is the number one thing I do advise people is like, if you have a choice between being inside and outside, go outside. Um, because like you said, this whole autoimmune, kind of crisis that we have is certainly a reflection of the fact that we spend so much time in not necessarily sterile but antimicrobial environments inside, where we're not being exposed to all sorts of pathogens that can be beneficial for the immune system. When we look at hunter gatherers, that bioanthropologists have studied their biometrics, one of the really interesting findings that's kind of counterintuitive is that they do not get dementia or Alzheimer's. They don't get heart disease. They don't get cancers the way that our society does, if at all. And some of that is due to the fact that they have parasites, right? So that sounds super yucky to us. And many of my friends have gone to non-industrialized countries and come back with something that they have to remove from their body or take antibiotics for. But when you're actually living in an environment, your immune system adjusts to that. The parasite causes you a positive stressor, which is called hormesis. And that hormesis then generates a more healthful state, such that we actually kind of evolved to need these pathogens and to be in our most flourishing state. So that's kind of crazy to me. But I'd rather, not have the expectation of having disease as an older person, right? Anyway, so how can we rewild, which is what we're trying to do, but sort of keep our contemporary lifestyle and keep our social relationships? And what I tell people is that it's all about understanding how hunter-gatherers lived and then adopting some of those practices. So, of course, going outside, going barefoot, wearing less clothing in the sun so that you can get more vitamin D exposure. But it's also about our social relationships. So choosing to be in physical contact with people, face-to-face interactions, especially with children, touching them more often than not, touching your loved ones, just igniting those biochemical reactions that happen, the oxytocin, the boost in serotonin that we get from physical touch and that kind of beautiful closeness and intimacy. That's something that everybody can do, is have more touch in their life. But there's also things, even in our digital world, you can Facebook like a hunter gatherer. And this is something I did, and it made me so much happier online because I reduced the amount of friends I had on Facebook to the size of kind of the largest possible hunter-gatherer group, which would be 150 people. So I don't know, I was at like 3,000, as we all are, right? Like you can just accumulate friends because that's what the algorithm wants you to do. It wants you to have that complexity, which then sort of overwhelms you and you get stressed out. I can't keep track of all these posts and I don't know who all these people are. And yet we're also addicted to that platform. So I reduced that number to 150, and the magic of that number, and you'll see, like on average, that's the number of people that are invited to weddings. It's the amount that you can sort of go and have a coffee with periodically and keep track of somebody's life and really have an in-depth conversation. And even that can be too much. Like most hunter-gatherer groups are 12 to 25 people. But once I did that, it was like Facebook became this welcoming, safe space where I knew everybody that I was interacting with. I felt I could speak my mind. It was just so much more socially supportive. So even something like that, I considered to be rewilding. And then there's just simply getting out into nature and learning plants and animals in your area, harvesting some easy to identify wild foods. Like everybody knows a dandelion, but do they know that a dandelion is more nutritious than spinach? So can you pick some dandelion leaves and add them to your soup tonight? Free food that's almost medicinal in its dense nutrition. There are, other ways we could talk about, the way we use toilets today is not really good for our bowels. So there's a device called a squatty potty, which allows you to be in the proper position for eliminating your waste. So even things like that, adding more fat to your diet, because the paleo hunter gatherer diet was definitely heavier in fat and animal products. If you are consuming that, putting more of that into your diet and then less sugar, that's also another way to rewild. But it's almost infinite, the paths that you can take towards aligning in a better way with your evolutionary heritage. So I know I've depicted people who are sort of extreme in this book, and they're like, flint knapping their own arrowheads, and they're shooting moose, and then making clothing from the moose hides, and living in structures that they built themselves. But it doesn't have to be like that. It can be very simple.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear all of your examples because all the ones that you just said, they're very approachable. You could kind of build them into a habit over time. It's really like any other lifestyle, like minimalism. You can integrate that in a way that best suits your life and in a way that is sustainable and approachable. Um, Other than your book, obviously, which is an excellent resource for learning how to rewild, what other resources could you share with listeners if they want to learn more about rewilding or even learn more about primitive skills,
Hmm.
primitive outdoor
Yeah, I
skills?
mean, right, right. Yeah, there are so many. I would say my top recommendation is always like just take your vacation week or two if you are able to get that and try out a primitive skills gathering. They're also called ancestral skills gathering. They happen at every time of the year, most often in the summer, but there are fall, winter, and spring ones. Um, every region of the United States, they're also in Europe and Israel. And these gatherings are really affordable, maybe $400 or less to spend a week in what approximates a hunter gatherer village. So you're going to be camping minimalistically, hopefully, and enjoying all of your meals, much of which are made from wild food that has been foraged and prepared by folks who know what they're doing with that. And then all day you can take classes and interact with people who've been practicing these skills for decades. So I found that to be the most useful way to acquire a bunch of skills in a short period of time. I think it was 1 week, and I learned the basics of flint knapping, learned about processing acorns, learned how to make sandals from rawhide, as I said, wove a basket. I mean, you can get a lot done because it's sort of a concentrated, hyper educational, but also super fun environment. And the reason it's possible is because you've left all your technology, all of your responsibilities behind, and so you could really focus on being in the present with experts. And when you bring your kids, should you have children, it's a real amazing refresher for them. I mean, they're kind of running around wild, climbing trees. At these gatherings, the kids are allowed to have knives if they've attended a knife safety workshop. So then the kids are busy crafting and exploring and meeting each other in multi-age groups. They're not just like first graders with first graders, 10th graders with 10th graders, which is so much more like how we evolved, right? In multi-age, multi-generational groups. And then there's a lot of partying. There's a lot of dance, festivity, fires, music, drumming. So I would say that's the top way. But if that's inaccessible for folks, there are so many free resources. There are lots of organizations in urban areas that are teaching rewilding and wilderness skills, especially for children. One that I feature in my book is called Rewild Portland, and they offer free workshops in Portland, Oregon, once a month for folks to learn a skill and come together in community and talk about the various issues of how to integrate this stuff into your modern life. So there's free resources from organizations. There's camps, there's survival programs. One school that I highly recommend is called BOSS, Boulder Outdoor Survival School. And they're in Boulder, Utah, not Boulder, Colorado. So it's a very isolated, remote, gorgeous place in the desert of Utah. And they train folks in all sorts of wilderness skills. And they even have, I think it's called the hunter gatherer immersion, where you can spend 28 days. And each day they sort of lessen the amount of industrial tools and modern technology that you can use, such that by the end, you're sort of spending a week out in the wilderness with your group with only stone age artifacts to survive with. And most people emerge from that very renewed with multiple kind of spiritual epiphanies and just a better understanding of what it means to be human on the earth. So many educational opportunities. And then there's always YouTube, which thank God. I mean, I'm not really into tech, but the things I have learned on YouTube, and I'm sure everybody in your audience has acquired new skills through that, but you can find every single primitive skill, every single wilderness survival tactic explained in detail by probably 100 different folks posting videos. So if you're the autodidact type who can teach yourself something, just sitting down with a free resource of YouTube and practicing skills that way is a great way to start.
Yeah, awesome. I'll be sure to link to some of the examples that you shared. And yeah, they all sound amazing.
Cool.
um, Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of those resources and also kind of about the journey of writing this book and all the things, not all the things, but some of the pinnacle things that you learned throughout it. And if people want to dive deeper, obviously check out your book, which is titled Why We Need to Be Wild. And how can listeners buy the book and or learn more about you?
Great. Yeah, the book is available at every online retailer and most local bookstores. I definitely encourage you to go to your local place because we need more of that. We need more local commerce. We need people just consuming from their local area, including books. So yeah, bookstores, online, and then my website, you can find me at whyweneedtobewild.com. And I'm on Instagram with the same tag at whyweneedtobewild. And I definitely welcome dialogue and conversation. And I love to be helpful to folks who are curious about rewilding. So please reach out if this moves you.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much again, Jessica. And yeah, there's so much to be learned from your book alone. So I do highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Meg. Great to talk to you today. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.